It's strange how the most ordinary evenings can become the ones you remember forever. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded arms and the creak that always made my son laugh when he was little. The house was quiet except for the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, my son and his wife tidying up after dinner. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt, how lucky I was to have my family under one roof, even if things had changed. Since my son got married, I never imagined that peace could shatter in a single sentence. He came into the living room, his face serious in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I looked up, expecting a simple question or maybe a request for advice. Instead, he sat across from me, cleared his throat, and said, "Dad, my wife's family will live here now." Just like that. No warning, no gentle leading, just a statement that landed like a stone in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at him, searching his face for a sign that this was a joke, some misunderstanding. But he looked away, unable to meet my eyes. The silence between us grew heavy, filled with all the things I wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. In that instant, the home I'd built, the life I'd poured myself into, felt like it was slipping away. I had no idea that this was only the beginning, that what would happen next would force me to question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and what it really means to be family. If you'd asked me 10 years ago what I was most proud of, I would have said my son without hesitation, without a second thought. I raised him on my own after his mother passed away, when he was just 6. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion and worry, but also of laughter and small victories. I learned to braid hair for school plays, to cook pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, to patch up scraped knees and broken hearts. Our little house became a fortress against the world, a place where it was just the two of us, figuring things out together. I worked long hours at the factory, sometimes picking up extra shifts just to make sure he never went without. There were nights I'd come home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but I'd still sit at the kitchen table and help him with his homework, or listen to him talk about his day. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that always felt like enough. I remember the way he used to run to the door when I got home, arms wide, shouting, "Dad," like I was a hero returning from battle. Those moments made every sacrifice worth it. Our home was never fancy, but it was filled with warmth. The walls were covered in his childhood drawings, the shelves lined with books we'd read together. Every corner held a memory of birthday, party with too many balloons, a Christmas morning when we both overslept, a rainy afternoon spent building a fort out of blankets. I tried to give him a sense of security, a place where he knew he was loved, no matter what. As he grew older, things changed, as they always do. He became more independent, started spending more time with friends, and eventually brought home the woman who would become his wife. I was happy for him, truly. I wanted him to have the kind of love I'd lost too soon. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the shift, the way our conversations grew shorter, the way he started asking for advice less and less. The house, once filled with our shared routines, began to feel quieter, as if it was waiting for something to fill the empty spaces. When he got married, I welcomed his wife into our home with open arms. I wanted her to feel like part of the family, to know that she was just as important to me as my own son. At first, things were good. We shared meals, laughed together, and I tried to give them space while still being present. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic began to change. Decisions were made without me, conversations happened behind closed doors, and I started to feel like a guest in my own home. I told myself it was just an adjustment period, that things would settle down. But the distance only grew. One missed the easy camaraderie I'd shared with my son, the way we used to finish each other's sentences or burst out laughing at the same old jokes. Now there was a formality to our interactions, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. I tried to ignore the ache in my chest, to focus on the good memories, but it was hard not to notice how much had changed. Looking back, I realized I was holding on to the past, clinging to the idea that our bond was unbreakable. I never imagined that the home I'd built for us could become a place where I felt so alone. But even as the distance grew, I kept hoping that things would turn around, that somehow we'd find our way back to each other. I just didn't know how much further things would have to fall before that could happen. It started with the little things, the kind you almost don't notice at first. A new set of dishes appeared in the kitchen, all white and modern, replacing the mismatched plates my son and I had collected over the years. The living room, once cluttered with our old board games and family photos, was suddenly neat and spare. The walls bare except for a single framed print his wife had chosen. I told myself it was normal. Every family changes, every home evolves, but each small shift felt like a piece of my life quietly being erased. At dinner, the conversation changed too. Where my son and I used to joke and tease, now there was a careful politeness, a sense that every word was being weighed. His wife would ask about my day, but her eyes would flick to my son before I could answer, as if checking for approval. Sometimes she'd bring up her own family, her parents' traditions, her brother's new job, her mother's favorite recipes. I tried to join in, to show interest, but I always felt like an outsider listening in on someone else's story. One evening, I came home to find the guest room being cleared out. My son and his wife were boxing up my old books and childhood keepsakes, making space, they said, for future plans. I asked what those plans were, but they just smiled and told me not to worry. I tried to laugh it off, but the truth was, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. It was my house, but I was starting to feel like a visitor. The tension grew in ways I couldn't always name. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. Decisions about the house, what to fix, what to buy, even what to cook were made without me. I'd find out about changes after the fact, like when the old armchair I loved disappeared one day, replaced by a sleek new sofa. We thought it was time for an upgrade. My son's wife said, her tone cheerful but final. My son just looked away, avoiding my eyes. I tried to hold on to my routines, the small rituals that made the house feel like home. I'd wake up early to make coffee, hoping for a quiet moment with my son before he left for work. But more often than not, he'd rush out the door, barely pausing to say goodbye. On weekends, I'd suggest we watch a movie or play cards like we used to, but there was always an excuse or errands to run, friends to see, plans with his wife's family. I started spending more time alone, retreating to my room with a book or taking long walks just to clear my head. The hardest part was the way my son seemed to change. He was still polite, still kind in his way, but there was a distance in his eyes, a reluctance to engage. When I tried to talk to him about how I was feeling, he'd brush it off. "Dad, you're overthinking it. We're just trying to make the house comfortable for everyone." But everyone didn't seem to include me anymore. Family dinners became awkward affairs. His wife would set the table with her new dishes, serve meals I barely recognized, and steer the conversation toward her own family's news. I'd sit there nodding along, feeling more and more invisible. Sometimes her parents would join us, their laughter filling the house in a way that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. I tried to be gracious to welcome them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being slowly pushed out. I started to wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe I was just struggling to adapt to change. But every day, the evidence mounted: a favorite mug missing, a family photo replaced, a decision made without me. I felt myself shrinking, my presence in the house growing smaller and smaller. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that my son would notice how much I was hurting. But deep down, I knew something fundamental had shifted, and I was powerless to stop it. Still, I clung to hope, telling myself that families go through rough patches, that love would win out in the end. But as the days passed, the tension only grew, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was standing on the edge of something. I couldn't name something that would change everything. Whether I was ready or not, I'll never forget the night everything finally came to a head. It was a Thursday, the kind of evening that should have been unremarkable. I'd just finished washing the dinner dishes, the kitchen still warm with the smell of roasted chicken. My son and his wife were sitting at the table, their voices low, their faces tense. I could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air, but I tried to ignore it, hoping it would pass like so many other awkward moments had. But this time was different. My son cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on the table. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice tight. I nodded, drying my hands on a dish towel, bracing myself for whatever was coming. His wife sat beside him, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't waste time with small talk. "My wife's parents need a place to stay. he began, glancing at her for support. They're going through a tough time, and we've decided they'll move in with us. It's the right thing to do for family. He paused, as if waiting for me to agree to offer my blessing. But I just stood there, stunned, my mind racing to catch up. He went on, his words coming faster now. We'll need to make some changes. Around the house, they'll take the guest room, and we'll need more space in the living areas. So it might be a little crowded for a while, but I'm sure we can make it work. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before our termination, but also a kind of resignation. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Where am I supposed to go? I finally managed, my words barely more than a whisper. He hesitated, glancing at his wife again. She spoke up, her tone measured but firm. We think it might be best if you take some time away. Maybe stay with a friend, or find a place of your own for a while, just until things settle down. Her words were polite, almost gentle. But the message was clear. I was being asked to leave my own home. I felt the room spin around me, the walls closing in. This house was all I had left of the life I'd built, the sacrifices I'd made. Every corner held a memory. Every creak in the floorboards a reminder of the years I'd spent raising my son, holding our little family together. And now, in the space of a few sentences, I was being told there was no longer room for me. I looked at my son, searching his face for any sign of regret, any flicker of the boy who used to run to me with open arms. But he just looked away, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists on the table. I realized then that the decision had already been made, that my feelings were just an afterthought. 1,000 things raced through my mind: guard, heartbreak, disbelief. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, to remind them of everything I'd done for this family. But all I could do was stand there, numb. As the reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy blanket, after a long, painful silence, I nodded. If that's what you want, I said quietly, my voice barely steady, I'll go. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. I packed a small bag that night, moving through the house like a ghost, touching the things I'd once called mine for what I feared might be the last time as I closed the door behind me. I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. I was heartbroken, yes, but also free from the tension that had been building for so long. I didn't know where I would go or what would happen next. All I knew was that my world had been turned upside down, and that the story of my family was far from over. Because sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones that lead to the most unexpected beginnings. The first night away from home, I barely slept. I lay on the lumpy couch in my old friend Mark's spare room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of that conversation in my mind. The shock hadn't worn off. If anything, it had settled deeper, a dull ache in my chest that wouldn't let me rest. I kept thinking maybe I'd wake up and realize it was all a bad dream. But morning came, and the reality was still there. Heavy and cold, Mark tried to make me feel welcome, offering coffee and a listening ear. But I could see the concern in his eyes. You sure you're all right, man? He asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could I explain the feeling of being exiled from your own life? If being told by your own son that you no longer belonged in the place you'd built together? I checked my phone constantly, half hoping for a message from my son, some sign that he regretted what had happened. But there was nothing. No missed calls, no texts, just silence. I wondered what was happening back at the house. Were they all ready? Moving in her parents, rearranging the furniture, erasing the last traces of me. The thought made my stomach twist. The next day, I went back to collect a few more things. I let myself in quietly, not wanting to make a scene. The house felt different, colder somehow, even though the sun was shining through the windows. Could hear voices upstairs, laughter that didn't include me. I moved through the rooms quickly, grabbing my old photo albums, a few shirts, the watch my son had given me for my 50th birthday. I tried not to look too closely at the changes, the new curtains, the unfamiliar shoes by the door. It's the family portrait of my son and his wife now hanging where our old picture used to be. I ran into my daughter-in-law in the hallway. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I hope you're settling in okay, she said, her tone polite but distant. I nodded, mumbling something about not wanting to be a burden. She didn't ask if I needed anything, didn't offer a word of comfort. It was as if I'd already become a memory, someone to be managed and moved aside. My son didn't come out to see me. I waited a few minutes hoping he'd appear, that maybe we could talk, clear the air. But he stayed upstairs, his absence louder than any words he could have said. I left quietly, closing the door behind me, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The days that followed blurred together. I tried to keep busy helping Mark with odd jobs around his place, taking long walks to clear my head. But everywhere I went, I carried the weight of what had happened. I replayed old memories, wondering where things had gone wrong. Had I been too strict, too soft? Had I failed him somehow, made him feel like he needed to choose someone else's family over his own? What hurt most was the indifference. I'd expected anger, maybe even a fight. But instead, there was just a cold, polite distance. My grief felt raw and exposed, while their lives seemed to move on without a hitch. I saw photos online of family. Dinners, celebrations, smiles that didn't include me. It was as if I'd been erased, my place in their lives filled by someone else. I tried to remind myself that I'd done my best, that I'd given everything I had. But the sense of betrayal lingered, sharp and unyielding. I wondered if my son would ever understand what he'd asked of me, what it meant to be cast out by your own child. I wondered if I'd ever find my way back, not just to my home, but to myself. Still, even in the midst of all that pain, a small part of me refused to give up hope. Maybe, I thought, this wasn't the end. Maybe there was something waiting for me on the other side of this heartbreak, something I couldn't see yet. But for now, all I could do was keep moving forward, one uncertain step at a time, not knowing that the next day would bring a message that would change everything. The days after I left the house were some of the loneliest I'd ever known. In that emptiness, something unexpected began to happen. At first, I moved through the motions, numb and uncertain, but slowly I started to notice the world around me again. The morning sun streaming through Mark's kitchen window, the smell, a fresh coffee, the sound of birds outside, small things I'd overlooked for years. I realized how much of myself I'd lost in the daily grind of being a father, always putting someone else's needs before my own. Mark, ever the loyal friend, insisted I join him for a walk in the park one afternoon. We talked about everything, and nothing old fishing trips. The music we used to love, the dreams we'd let slip away. For the first time in a long while, I laughed, really laughed, and felt the weight on my chest lighten just a little. Later, another friend from work called, inviting me to a poker night I'd always turned down before. I went, hesitant at first, but found comfort in the easy banter and familiar faces. It was a reminder that I still had a life outside those four walls, that I was more than just a father or a placeholder in someone else's story. I started to build new routines. I'd wake up early, take a walk around the block, and treat myself to breakfast at the little diner on Main Street. I read books I'd been meaning to finish for years, called my sister just to hear her voice, and even tried my hand at cooking. Something new. Each small act felt like a step toward reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten. But even as I found these moments of peace, the ache of loss lingered. I missed my son, missed the life we'd shared, and wondered if he ever thought about me. I tried not to dwell on it, but some nights the silence was too much. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying old memories and wondering if I'd ever truly belong anywhere again. Then, one morning, everything changed. I was sipping coffee at the diner when my phone buzzed a message from my son. Heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting another polite dismissal. But his words were different this time. "Dad, can we talk? Something's happened. I need you." I stared at the screen, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. What could have changed so quickly? Was he reaching out because he missed me, or because something had gone wrong? I felt a surge of hope, mixed with fear. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to find out. For the first time since I'd left, I felt a sense of purpose, a reason to move forward. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the chance to finally speak my truth, to stand up for myself, and to see if there was still a place for me in my son's life. I finished my coffee, took a deep breath, and prepared myself for whatever was coming next, knowing that the story wasn't over yet, that the next chapter might just surprise us both. When I arrived at the house, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. I hadn't set foot on that porch since the night I left, and every step felt heavy with memories. My son opened the door before I could even knock. He looked tired older somehow, as if the weight of the past week had settled into his bones. For a moment, we just stood there, unsure of how to begin. He led me inside, and I noticed right away how different the house felt. The living room was cluttered with boxes, voices echoed from the kitchen, and the air was thick with tension. His wife's parents were there, speaking in low, urgent tones. I caught a glimpse of his wife, her face drawn and anxious. It was clear that the new arrangement was anything but harmonious. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where he'd once asked me to leave. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw. "I thought I was doing the right thing, helping her family, but it's been a mess. It's been arguing, no privacy, and I feel like I've lost control of my own home. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how." To say no? Hearing those words, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him everything would be all right. But another part of me remembered the pain of being pushed aside, the loneliness of those first nights away. I realized that forgiveness wasn't as simple. As walking back through the door, he looked at me, eyes pleading. "Would you come back, or at least help me figure this out? I miss you, Dad. I miss how things used to be." I sat there, weighing my options. I could return, try to patch things up, pretend nothing had changed. Or I could set new boundaries, protect the piece of myself I'd started to reclaim. For the first time, I understood that I had a choice, that my worth wasn't tied to being needed or to sacrificing myself for someone else's comfort. I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "I love you, son. I always will. Bet things can't go back to the way they were. We both need to learn how to stand up for ourselves, how to say what we need. I'll help you, but I need my own space too. I need to live my life, not just be a guest in yours." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. I really do. I'm sorry for everything." We talked for a long time, hashing out what the future might look like. Visits, shared meals, but also boundaries and respect. It wasn't the ending I'd once hoped for, but it was honest and it was real. As I left the house that day, I felt a bittersweet sense of closure. Family, I realized, isn't about living under the same roof. It's about loving each other enough to let go, to forgive, and to grow together, but also apart. And sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones that set us free. Looking back now, I see that losing my place in the house wasn't the end of my story, was the beginning of a new chapter I never expected. The pain of being pushed aside by my own son cut deeper than I ever thought possible. But it also forced me to face truths I'd been avoiding for years. I learned that love doesn't mean sacrificing every part of yourself, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of the roles that no longer serve you. For so long, I measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure. I thought being a good father meant always saying yes, always making room, even when it left me with nothing. But I see now that real love, real family means respecting yourself enough to set boundaries, to speak your needs, and to walk away when staying would mean losing yourself. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt unbearable, when I questioned every decision I'd made. But in that emptiness, I found space to rediscover who I am outside of being a parent. I reconnected with old friends, found comfort in small routines, and learned to enjoy my own company. I realized that my life still has value, even if it looks different than I imagined. If you're watching this and you've ever felt betrayed or replaced by the people you love, I want you to know you're not alone. Your pain is real and your story matters. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, to demand respect, and to choose peace even if it means walking away from what you once called home. Healing takes time, but it's possible. And sometimes the most unexpected endings lead to the most powerful new beginnings. Who knows what the next chapter will bring? All I know is I'm ready to face it with hope, with courage, and with the knowledge that I am enough, just as I am, and maybe Just maybe, the best is yet to come.